Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Dogman Encounter horror stories. First story, Dogman Encounter story. Back around 20 years ago, I was visiting my great-uncle in the region around Kerrville, Texas. At the time, he was living in his first house in the area before he moved to a retirement community near a small set of trees. The trees were beautiful, really, as is the hill country. I was staying with him and my great-aunt for about a week when we went out for an evening to walk his dachshund, as we tended to do in evenings in general. The walk was uneventful as the sun set, just a normal evening complete with the calls of doves and other wildlife, and the dog just having a wonderful time. Then, suddenly, all the wildlife went deafeningly silent, and both of us froze, as did the dog. I remember having a distinct sense of unease and fear that I could not quite explain, and the dog looking directly in a specific area near a streetlight. My eyes turned to where the dog was looking. There was a creature loping through there, a dog-like thing about the size of a large Labrador Dachshund hybrid. Save that on the creature's neck there was a head the size of a bear, and the thing was loping up and down in a way that fitted that kind of build. It looked hypnotic in a sense, and I was more terrified than I have ever been with anything else I ever saw. It gave me a visceral understanding of Lovecraft's idea that things that just look fundamentally wrong are terrifying precisely because the proportions do not fit. That thing was powerfully built, too. The upper limbs in particular were very stout, and the dog remained frozen for another few minutes before we moved back to the house. I'm not sure what precisely that was, or if it was a Dogman, but it convinced me that something like that could exist. The sudden silence that lasted for a few minutes after it left, and the dog just being frozen without even growling or barking still sends chills in me when I remember it. As my only encounter was something like a cryptid, too, it remains something very vivid in my mind. Not least because I know how dogs move, I know what wolves would move like, and whatever that was, it was no natural thing that made sense. Second story. The government hunts down mythical creatures and uses them against enemies of the state. I am a retired Army Special Forces operator who has 20 years of experience under my belt. 10 of those years were spent with the Scout Rangers, conducting jungle reconnaissance, covert operations, raids, hostage rescue, and all the other special operations tasks you would expect from elite military formations like SR. Meanwhile, the other 10 years was dedicated to hunting down mythical and paranormal creatures and employing said creatures against internal and external threats to the nation. I can bore you with stories of my first 10 years in the Rangers, but I doubt that it would be anything new from the stories you've already heard Special Forces operators do. Go behind enemy lines, stay undercover for weeks on end, raid enemy camps. Those are all the usual stories that have been told by others before me. So instead of telling my experiences there, I'll instead go straight to the one I'm sure has piqued your interest, my 10 years working with mythical and paranormal creatures. The idea of using mythical and paranormal creatures may seem strange at first. However, it has been a practice that has been an armed forces doctrine for nearly 7 decades now, and I doubt it that they have plans of removing it anytime soon. It is an effective method of clearing an area of enemies, and although mistakes can result in catastrophic problems, such occurrences are few. Now, I'm not saying mistakes rarely happen, because a good number of them happened in the past. However, their numbers are small enough that not many people take note of them. Besides, since operations often happen in isolated areas in hostile insurgent territory, any unexpected casualties from nearby innocent civilians can easily be blamed on the local insurgency. Now, I can go on into more detail about the cover-up campaigns and screening operations made by the government to hide their use of mythical and paranormal creatures, but that task is assigned to another special operation group of the armed forces. I'm not exactly sure of what their operations are and how their operations group is run, but I do know that they are effective in their job. Anyways, getting back on track, my Special Operations Group is known as the Mythical and Paranormal Warfare Operations Group, MPWOG, although we just refer to it as MPOG since it's less of a mouthful. You're probably thinking I'm crazy right now for saying this, and I can't blame you. If I heard of such a thing all those years ago, I would have laughed too if I had heard of such a group. It sounds outrageous and silly. True, the armed forces used psychological warfare to trick insurgents that creatures like Aswangs were out to get them. But those were nothing more than just props and sounds, not actual mythical creatures. However, if it weren't for the fact that I encountered MPOG during one of those few accidents I was talking about, then I would have never thought that the government really used creatures of pure evil to fight its enemies. It happened sometime around 1988. Back then, my Scout Ranger Company was deployed at southern Luzon to assist Regional Unified Command, foreign operations against the communist insurgents in the area. Patrolling the various jungle-covered mountains in the region, we would spend weeks out in the field trying to locate any trails that led to the insurgents' camps. Because of the dense jungle in the area, it wasn't too hard for the enemy to conceal their camps from aerial observation. Unable to locate insurgent bases from the air, it was up to us Rangers to hunt them down. However, on one of our nightly hunts, we encountered something that would change the rest of my career. Trekking through the mountainous jungle, trying to keep as silent as possible, my squad went through an unmarked path, hoping to find any evidence of insurgent activity. The plan was to find as many tracks as possible until they led us to their main camp. This was easier said than done, but we like to pride ourselves at being good at these kinds of jobs. All around us were a dense concentration of trees and slippery, muddy ground, while just a few meters away, on both our flanks, were various mountain caves that ominously stared at us. From my position near the head of our column, I did my best to constantly glance towards the caves, being mindful to note any sign of movement. Such places were perfect hiding spots, and there was no way of telling if an insurgent was hiding inside, ready to come out and fire a long burst of automatic rifle fire. Despite being special forces, night vision goggles were pretty rare back then, especially for us field units. Because of this, we had to rely on our eyes, the moonlight, and our refined instincts in order to feel what was in our surroundings. A few hours into our patrol, my pointman, a PFC Gomez, reported seeing smoke a few meters ahead of us. Immediately ordering a halt, I told my squad to take a defensive position and keep their eyes open for a potential ambush. After that, I quietly made my way forward until I reached Gomez, who was crouching down by some underbush. "What's up ahead?" I asked in a whisper as I crouched down next to him. He pointed toward the tree up ahead of us. "You see that big tree over there?" Well, when the wind blew and caused the leaves of the trees ahead of us to begin to sway, I managed to get a quick and clear view of its top. I noticed there was smoke coming from it. From on top of the tree, I asked, squinting my eyes to stare at where he was pointing at. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, just wait for the wind." So I did. Soon enough, a strong breeze came along, making the many branches of the trees around us sway, opening up the curtain of leaves that had earlier blocked my line of sight. Through that small opening, I just managed to see the top of the big tree Gomez was pointing at, and right on top of it was a trail of smoke. Reflecting from the moonlight, a trail of thin white smoke emitted from inside a wall of large leaves atop the tree, as if it were a chimney. I found this odd, and I remember thinking how strange it was for someone to make camp on top of a tree. But I quickly shrugged off my doubts, as I realized that it could be an insurgent lookout who was using the tree as a safe outpost to guard their perimeter. I had never encountered such a situation before, but it made sense to me at the time. A large tree provided a safe, concealed place from where a sentry could stay for the night and observe the ground below him. With that in mind, I convinced myself that it was indeed probably an insurgent there who had stupidly lit a fire on top his tree or had carelessly decided to smoke a cigarette. Whichever of the two, it gave away his position. The presence of an outpost like that could have been a sign that we were close to their camp. Emboldened by this, I decided to push my squad forward to further investigate the area and gather more intelligence. Following behind Gomez, I kept my eyes on the tree, looking for any sign of movement. The rest of the squad followed behind us, all alert and ready to engage in case something bad happened. Then, all of a sudden, I heard the sound of rustling leaves and bending branches. Quickly reacting to this, I aimed my rifle forward and pointed it towards the big tree ahead of us. By then, we were only 10 meters away from the tree, and I was afraid that the insurgent noticed our approach and hurriedly got down to make an escape. However, when I scanned the area near the tree, I saw no person nearby. Thinking that he managed to escape and run for home, I let out a curse in frustration. In my mind, I assumed that he would soon be informing his superior of our presence, and we would then have a patrol sent against us. Not wanting to risk an action with such a small force, I began planning our escape. However, before I could give out any orders, a deep and old voice spoke loudly from our right. "You're not supposed to be here," it said firmly, making me almost jump from my position. Out of instinct, I immediately pointed my weapon at the source of the sound. The rest of my squad did the same. At first, I couldn't actually see the source of the voice. However, as I searched the shadows, my eyes soon fell on something that made my spine shiver in fear. Through the dim light of the moon, I managed to see a bulky naked man, with skin so dark that he almost seemed like a shadow. Scanning his body, I couldn't help but notice how large and grotesque his arms, legs, and torso were. The muscles on them were large and seemingly deformed, giving him a shape that seemed odd and unsettling. Soon fixing my gaze upon his face, I then saw two wide white eyes staring back at me with an unnatural aura that made my heart nearly stop in fright. I don't scare easily, so I was surprised at how scared I was feeling during that moment. Studying the person before me, I was unsure why he looked so strange and so frightening. I felt uneasy just to stand before him, and I had to fight the urge to step back and bolt away from him. I was confused by this and didn't know why I was so scared. Trying my best to keep my composure, I tried to push away further thought of fear as I spoke up towards the person who stumbled upon us. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my sights trained on him as I kept a stern grip on my weapon. "What are you doing here?" He responded to my question by laughing. In a very rough tone, I let out a deep laugh, as if it was mocking me for asking him such questions. Normally, I would have been angry at such a taunt, but instead I felt scared. Watching him carefully, I then saw his hand move to grab something, forcing me to act on my instincts. "Don't move. Keep your hands on your sides," I shouted, but he simply ignored me. In my mind, I thought he was grabbing for a gun or worse, a grenade. Reacting as fast as I can, I quickly pressed the trigger of my rifle. However, to my surprise, I found myself unable to do so. Trying to pull my finger to pull the trigger, I realized that I could not do it. This simple act, one that I have done countless times, could not be done. As if some kind of invisible force was preventing me, I found my finger frozen and stopped. Then I noticed that my squad was not reacting to the strange man's movements. I knew them, each one of the rangers in my squad, and I knew that they too would have instantly pulled the triggers of the rifles and shot the man. Yet not a single shot was fired. Finding my body frozen and my heart pumping fast in fear, I was surprised to find that I was still able to turn my head. Looking left and right, I saw each member of my squad seemingly frozen, as we were all stuck in a pose of pointing our guns at the man, but unable to do anything else but turn our heads. Studying the expressions on the rangers closest to me, I can see the fear plastered on their faces, the same fear that I knew was on mine. Trying to mask the fear with anger, I can hear a chorus of curses coming out of their mouths as they tried to comprehend what was happening. I too would have let out a curse, but the remaining calm part of my mind told me that it wouldn't have done anything to change the situation. So instead of shouting, I remained silent and returned my focus to the strange man. Checking what the man had grabbed, I was surprised and confused to see that he had picked up a thick-lit cigarette, whose smoke and stench freely floated in the air. Placing the cigarette in his mouth, he then looked at each one of us and gave an unsettling large smile, which revealed teeth that were as white as his eyes. I'm not supposed to let anyone pass through this trail, it told us in its deep voice. Then it began to move closer towards us. None of you should be here. Still unable to move, we were left helpless. One of my rangers, a PFC Dominguez, found himself being approached directly by the strange man. Watching the man as he approached Dominguez, I can see him smile at the ranger and blow a thick cloud of smoke towards his face, making the ranger cough. After coughing out the smoke he inhaled, Dominguez turned his head to give the man a long look before turning his head towards me. "Sergeant, I think," he began, his voice shaky as both me and the strange man stared at him. "I think he's a copper." "A copper?" "A creature known to lurk in the jungles and mess around with those who travel through them." We had all heard the stories as kids, and as I stared at the man before us then, I still found it hard to believe that the man before was a copper. That small part of my brain tried to rationalize what was actually happening, as I thought that coppers were nothing but mythical creatures. They couldn't possibly exist. I fought the urge to believe what Dominguez had said, and instead thought that what really was before us was an insurgent. Somehow, this insurgent had administered some sort of airborne chemical agent that had paralyzed our bodies and prevented us from moving. That was what I tried to convince myself. I would have held on to that belief if it were not for the events that happened next. Staring sharply at Dominguez with his large eyes, I saw the man's expression change from amused to hurt, then to angered. Feeling my blood chill, I felt my fear rise up as he moved his face closer towards Dominguez until his eyes were staring directly at him. "Don't you ever dare call me a copper," its deep voice shouted, the noise seemingly echoing all around us. "You will pay for what you said." Then he moved his head to stare at each one of us, scanning our faces and glancing at our eyes. "You will all pay for being here tonight. None of you are supposed to be here." Trying to comprehend what he meant, I suddenly felt my thoughts interrupted when my hands suddenly began to move against my will. Unable to stop them, I let out a curse as I felt my hands loosen its grip on my rifle, before having one hand move towards the holster of my sidearm. My eyes went wide when I felt my hand grip my pistol and pull it out of the holster. Being willed by something else, my hands then switched off the safety of the pistol before raising the weapon up. Realizing what was happening, I tried my best to fight my own uncontrollable hand. "Don't resist it," the copper said, his voice low and seemingly everywhere. "Do it. Don't fight back. Let your desire end the pain." Using all the willpower I had, I fought and fought, trying to tell my own hand not to obey the copper's will. To my surprise, my efforts seemed to be doing something, as the smooth movement of my hands suddenly slowed as if encountering resistance. Feeling encouraged, I closed my eyes and tried to blot out the voice of the copper, but suddenly got knocked off my concentration when I heard 3 loud gunshots. My senses returned to my surroundings. My ears then caught 3 firm thuds around me, and I soon realized what that was. Corporal Villanueva, PFC Gomez, and PFC Ronaldo all carried sidearms. If they were being willed to do the same thing my own hands were trying to do to me, then it means they had lost the fight. Unable to spare a second to grieve for them, I tried to return my focus to my own battle. However, I was once more distracted by the shouts and curses from the remaining members of my squad. PFC Dominguez, PFC Hernandez, and PFC Isidro did not have sidearms, but they did carry combat knives for covert operations. The horrible image of them trying to stab themselves filled my mind as I realized that this was a much worse fate compared to being shot by your own hand against your will. Listening to their battle, I felt my heart drop as they cried out in anger and frustration. Letting out screams, they fought hard to save their lives. But it sounded like a losing battle. Join your friends, the copper said, his words ringing in my ears. It is time to rest now, so let it be and don't fight back. Death will be swift and peaceful. A succession of sharp stabs could then be heard, followed by gurgling sounds after each one. I knew where their knives went, and I felt heartbroken as each one of them fell to the ground, leaving me as the only one left in my squad. With my heart broken and my mind sufficiently distracted, my uncontrollable hand was able to gain some advantage, as it managed to move the barrel of my pistol closer to the temple of my head. Emotionally drained by the loss of my Rangers, a small part of me felt that I should give in and let this unknown force make my hand kill myself. But I was a stubborn person and I kept fighting. I knew that it was losing the fight and that it was only a matter of time before the pistol got a good angle against me. But I would not just give in so easily. I want to fight till the last second, just like my Rangers did. Trying my best to return my will to my hand, I concentrated as much as I could, trying to avoid any distractions. This, however, proved harder than expected as the copper moved itself in front of me and stared. Chuckling deeply as it watched me, it stared right into my eyes. By doing this, I found it harder to fight my hand, as the copper gave some sort of invisible power to ensure that I would lose. Your friends are waiting for you, he said. What's the point of living without them? Join them, join them, join them. Cursing it over and over, I allowed my rage to give me strength to resist for just a bit longer. But each second brought the barrel of my pistol closer and closer to the temple of my head. I was now losing strength, and sheer anger and force of what would not prevent my oncoming death. However, just before the barrel could move the last inch towards my temple, I suddenly felt the unseen control on my hand loosen, then disappear. Taken by surprise by this, I looked forward towards the copper to see him stare at something behind me, before slowly backing away. As he retreated, I felt the wonderful sensation of being able to control my body once more. Feeling suddenly weak as my will was returned, I almost collapsed onto the ground. However, I managed to maintain enough strength to keep myself up as I watched the copper move backwards before turning around to make a sprint in what looked like an attempt to escape. But before it could get away, it suddenly stopped, as if someone blocked its path. Before I could find out what had stopped it, I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Instinctively, I turned around and suddenly saw 3 figures approaching me. At first, I mistook the dark silhouettes approaching me as more coppers. However, I soon realized that these figures were smaller. Careful study of them reassured me that they were not creatures of the unknown, but instead fellow humans. But as I studied them, I couldn't help but wonder who they were. The 3 men had black battle dress uniforms, making them easily blend with the night. Staring at them as they approached, I noticed all 3 of them had their weapons drawn and ready. However, I also noted that each one of them had a hand raised. Focusing on their raised hands, I noticed that they were all holding a large bottle with a silver-colored material inside of it. For a moment, I wondered what was inside that bottle before letting my thoughts drift and wonder who these men were. Inspecting the gear on them, I was impressed to see that they were fully kit for combat and night operations, and aside from the fact that they lacked a helmet, They seemed to remind me of combat-ready American soldiers. With night vision goggles on their faces, ballistic vests protecting their torso, and a vest filled with rifle magazines and grenades, they looked nothing like the common field soldiers in the armed forces. Due to their look, I initially mistook them as American Special Forces who somehow stumbled upon my predicament. However, a quick greeting in Tagalog quickly threw away my assumption, as I soon realized that these men were Filipinos. "Hey, are you all right?" one of them asked as he approached me. "Yes," I managed to reply, my voice shaky. Lifting my hand, I saw that it was shaking also. The battle had taken its toll both on my mind and body. "Good," he told me, with a hint of relief in his voice. "You're one lucky person, you know that?" Moving closer to check on me, he soon pulled me aside so I could find a place to sit and rest. As he did this, I was able to look at the ground around me to see 6 bodies lying on the ground. I felt a pang in my heart as I saw them. My whole squad was dead now, and emotions swirled inside me at the thought of it. As I sat down and tried to reflect on what happened, I suddenly remembered the creature that caused all of this trouble and turned my attention towards the direction I last saw him. Still standing in the same spot, I saw the copper remained unmoving in his position as another group of black-cladded soldiers emerged from the darkness, weapons drawn and ready. Although I had a hard time seeing clearly in the night, I did note that this group also had raised hands, and I knew that this meant that they too were carrying the same bottles filled with silver-colored material. As these men got closer to the copper, the creature seemed to hiss in anger at each step they took. However, unlike his earlier arrogance and dominance, the copper looked helpless against the new arrivals. Once more my curiosity was ignited, as I wondered who these men were and what was so special about these bottles these men carried. As I sat there and watched, I took in what I could and hoped that I would at least get some answer from them later on. After a while, most of the black-cladded men formed a circle around the copper, while one detached himself from the main group and walked towards me. As he got closer, he took a quick glance towards my fallen rangers before doing a sign of the cross. "I'm sorry about your friends," he told me. "I'll detail one of my squads to recover them once we secure our target." "You mean that copper?" I inquired. "Yes, but that's not a copper. Never mistake it as a copper. They hate it when you do that," he said, gesturing towards the terrible monster behind him. "What that is Agda. Similar to a copper, yes, but only native to Eastern Visayas. Unlike copperas, they're more hostile and can get very dangerous. But they're easy to control once you get mercury near them." "Is that what you were carrying in those bottles?" I asked. "Yes," he said, before continuing his explanation. "Mercury has this magical effect on them that weakens their power. An Agda can seduce you to do things you don't like, but if you have mercury on you, then it is unable to use its powers or strength." "Well, that's good to know," I said, making a note to always bring mercury with me in any future patrol. However, as he explained the creature to me, there was one thing that nagged my mind. Taking my chances, I decided to ask him in hopes of getting an answer. "You said that Agdas were native to Eastern Visayas, right? So what is it doing here in Luzon?" "Because we brought him here," he told me plainly. "You brought him here?" I said, nearly shouting it. Eyes wide in shock, I felt more confused than ever. Why would you bring a terrible creature like that here? I felt rage boil inside me at the thought of what they had done. "You're soldiers too, aren't you? You're supposed to protect the country, not spread harm within its borders," I said, although at the time I wasn't really sure if they were soldiers like me. For all I knew, they could actually be members of a private army for some kind of organization that collects these creatures. "Easy now, it's not like we had a choice," he explained. "The orders came from the AFP chief, who ordered MPOG to deploy Sen 109, since he thought the Agda would be an effective way of countering insurgent movements in the area. Well, he did do a good job for the first few nights, but apparently his habit of mischief made him forget that our deal meant that he could only target members of the insurgency. He was out of line for targeting your men, and I apologize that our operations group did not realize the danger sooner. This was our first time deploying an Agda, and maybe the last. I stared at him for a moment and took in what he said. However, out of all the things he said, there was one thing that stuck out the most that I couldn't help but continue to think about. What's MPOG? With that, he began telling me about the operations group and how they used mythical and paranormal creatures for various clandestine operations. He was a lieutenant, I learned, and his platoon was one of a few elite units trained at deploying and capturing creatures and entities through the use of special methods and equipment. At first, I didn't want to believe him. But then again, how could I not believe him when one of the very creatures they used had attacked me and killed my squad? At the end of his explanation, I found myself with a new view of the world. As if my eyes are now open, I now realize that there were more things that lurk in the darkness of the jungle than just insurgents. This scared me a lot, and I realized that I suddenly felt thankful for the fact that an organization like MPOG existed to make sure that such creatures and entities did not wreak havoc upon the cities, towns, and barrios of the country. Why tell me all this? I finally asked, if your operations group is supposed to be secret, why reveal so much information to an outsider like me? I looked at him, and through the faint light of the moon, I saw a grin form on his face. Because I see potential in you. I have never seen someone with a strong enough will to resist the deadly seductions of an Agda, and because of that I know MPOG would have a place for you. Recruitment season is coming up soon, and the operations group only sends invitations to those who we think will qualify. Once the offer arrives, I hope you take it. With that, he gave me a small nod before walking away. A few minutes later, the rest of the MPOG forces arrived to help secure the area and contain the Agda. Later that morning, I was returned to the army camp, which me and my squad had left the night before. The official story was that my squad was ambushed by insurgents and that I was able to hold out until reinforcements arrived to recover me and the bodies of my rangers. For this, I was awarded the Gold Cross. However, knowing the true events, I felt unworthy to receive the award. This was my first encounter with mythical creatures and MPOG, but it was definitely not the last. 2 months after the encounter, I received a letter inviting me for MPWOG qualifications. I accepted it, and thus my career in the operations group began. You're probably wondering what this letter has to do with you. Well, the lieutenant I met during the night of the Agda encounter was your father. He would eventually become my commanding officer and, in later years, a good friend. I know you are curious about who he really was and what happened to him, so I will tell you about his deeds and his ultimate faith. But I need to make sure first that you believe me. I don't want to waste time and energy writing a letter that you might just crumple up and throw away. So if you get this and believe what I am saying, then I suggest that you write back to me and I'll tell you all about your father's time at MPOG. This letter was recently sent to me, and I need help figuring out what to do next. For a few months now, I have been collecting various notes and journals of my father in order to create a biography in his honor. My father was a scout ranger who achieved the rank of major before passing away in an operation that was deemed so secret that until today me and my family still don't know what exactly happened. As part of the biography, I had asked various colleges of my father to write letters about their experience with him. I have received dozens of letters from his old army friends, but this one stuck out the most. At first, I didn't know if I should believe him. Everything he said didn't make sense. My father was a scout ranger, not some special forces operator that worked with mythical creatures that don't exist. However, the letter came with a photo. In that photo were two uniformed men posing next to some kind of makeshift sandbag bunker. Both men had patches with MPWOG written on it. One of the men was my father. Third story. I encountered a mad dog when I was younger. He may have saved my life. I needed to mature fast after my mother passed away. My father took me and my little brother in. I was the one who got us ready for school, walked him to the bus, and every morning I would get to class on time. Planning meals with a limited budget was tricky. I made sure my little brother always had at least 2 meals a day. I wish it were 3, but the money simply wasn't there. Due to scarifies, my body didn't grow properly. I was 13, but appeared to be 9. My father was rarely home. That suited me. One night, he packed us in the back of his truck. It smelled terrible. I knocked aside fast food bags, jealous. He was eating something we rarely got. This drive was different. He didn't tell us where we were going. My brother was only 6, but he was smart enough not to ask questions. We drove for a long time. I felt sleepy but refused to drift off. Was he finally tired of us and decided to dump 2 poor kids at our aunt's house? I dearly wish that was what happened that night. He parked outside of an old, run-down apartment building. I carried my sleeping brother as a pair of men outside-eyed us. An urge to run started in the back of my mind. Soon I was being forced inside, the hallway reeking of old cigarette smoke. The walls of the long hallway were stained over the years, and trash littered the ground. My arms burned from the strain, but I refused to let go of the only family member I cared about. We were led inside a dark room. 2 men waited for us, smoking in chairs across from a couch. I was shoved towards the empty seat. Carefully, I put down Noah. He slept like a rock, unaware he was no longer in the truck. I sat down next to him, holding his small hand, and studied the room. Aside from a table and the chairs, there was no furniture. I've never seen the other men before. My father appeared stressed. It was a new expression on his face. "Are they good?" he asked the 2 men. The younger one nodded towards the older man, lighting another smoke. His gray hair was pushed back out his face. I didn't see his expression well in the dim light until he leaned over to study us. My skin crawled with his eyes on me. I swallowed hard, fearing the real reason why we were there. "Good enough," he said in a deep voice that sounded like he had smoked a pack a day since he had been born. The other man called for someone to bring in a bag from the other room. It landed in front of my father's feet with a heavy thud. The zipper was half undone, so I saw stacks of bills inside. A piece of paper was sticking out of the bag. He snatched it up quickly, signing the bottom. My mouth grew dry. I knew what just happened. The man I once called a father had sold us. I was too scared to even protest. The room swam. This couldn't be happening. "There. Signed. I'm out of here," he said, and dropped the paper to lift the bag. "Thank you. Oh, also one more thing," the younger man said, making my father pause. With one swift motion, he pulled out a handgun and then fired once. A body collapsed to the floor. The sound woke my brother, who started to tear up. He was confused and scared in a new place. But I was glad he didn't see what I just did. The person who brought in the money walked back into the room again to retrieve the cash. My heart was beating out of my chest as I stared down at the lifeless body of the man who had just tossed us away. Laughter started to fill the room. The smoker sounded like he had just watched the funniest thing he ever saw in his entire life. Within seconds, we were grabbed by another stranger to be dragged away. We struggled, screamed, and cried. Our efforts meant nothing. We were manhandled into a small apartment with the door firmly locked. No matter how hard I pounded, I could not get it open. I cursed my small body, and I cursed my father. He got himself killed, and now no one could save us. Noah was crying hard. I needed to focus on him. I couldn't do anything else. He was confused, not understanding what just happened, and I couldn't explain it to him. I guided him to the small bathroom to get cleaned up. I didn't dare risk using the dirty tub. Instead, I found a somewhat clean cloth to wash away his tears with warm water. Noah always acted much younger than he was in stressful situations. He was lucky that no one bullied him at school, and he had a lot of friends. He kept asking me when our father would take us home. I had no answers and couldn't even think of a lie. There was a somewhat clean bed out in the main room. I checked it over for stains before I let him lay down for a while. We could do nothing but wait. I did look around for anything I could find to use as a weapon. Back then, I vaguely knew what an older man would want with a child. All rose to my throat with those thoughts. I would rather die than let anyone hurt poor Noah. He had already gone through enough in his short life. The door opened a few hours later. My brain had already thought of 1,000 different horrible possibilities. I decided to be the one to make the first move. I charged at the man, teeth and nails out. Latching on his arm, I tried doing as much damage as possible. He didn't even flinch. He easily took the back of my shirt collar to lift me off my feet and placed the rabid child at the foot of the bed. He looked at his scratched arm with a raised eyebrow. In his other hand were a few bags of fast food. Good effort. Here, I got some Happy Meals for you two. He offered the food, but I refused. Noah woke up from a noise and crawled behind me. I knew he was starving, but smart enough to take anything from a stranger. I'm not going to eat that. You drugged it so you could do who knows what to us. I snapped. He still held out the bags while putting a hand on his hip. He wore a button-down dress shirt with the collar undone and gray press pants. If it wasn't for his unkempt hair, I would have assumed he had a somewhat respectable job. I don't need to drug you two to do anything. You're tiny, like bugs. He raised 2 fingers in front of his eye, pretending to squish us. I scowled, hating how true his words were. As a sign of goodwill, he reached in the bag to pull out a burger. He ate it in 2 bites, trying to prove he hadn't drugged the meal. I can't explain why, but I accepted the food. There was something about his expression and tone that made me trust him. He appeared so much different than how he acted in front of the others. I should be weary of him considering he had bought us. And yet I let Noah happily eat the offered Happy Meal. He sipped at his milk, offering me some. I refused, knowing he needed it more. What are you going to do? I asked as I picked away at the fries. Nothing you assumed I was. He commented. I narrowed my eyes, trying to see if he was lying. But what was the point of making us get our guard down? He was right about easily being able to overpower 2 small children. Finish your dinner, then we'll talk. I watched him find a chair on the other side of the room to sit down. He flipped through some old newspaper to read, passing the next few minutes. It was nice to have a full meal in my stomach. It would help me face whatever was going on. Noah soon fell asleep again. It had been a long time since he last got to eat so much. I made sure he was comfortable, then got off the bed to face the stranger. What's your name? I asked him, trying to sound like an adult instead of a child. He had his chin on his palm, his gray eyes studying me in a way I didn't like. For a moment, he appeared old. Not just like the middle-aged man his body was, but something far greater than anything else I've ever come across. Graves, he finally said. Lame, I replied, rolling my eyes. He laughed, not offended by my comment. For some reason, I felt like if I asked questions, he would treat me like we were equals. I rarely came across adults that listened to my questions, let alone gave answers. Why did you buy us? I got down to the most important part. Your father was in deep with a little gang. They wanted to use my services to take care of a rival leader problem. I cannot act unless I am given permission by a human and if I'm paid for my work. I asked for a child or 2. Your father just so happened to have just the thing. He was fully paid fair and square. He shrugged, speaking as if he was talking about the weather and not what led to my father's death. I huffed with my arms crossed. Okay, but why do you want some children? Are you going to, eat us? I said, sounding brave, but deep down praying that wasn't the case. He paused and then reached into his pocket to pull out a Happy Meal toy. I had noticed one missing. It wasn't my main concern, so I didn't bring it up. I wanted this. But do you know how embarrassing it is to get the toys when you're not buying the meals for some kids? I swear the workers just know. I could never live it down. I stood stunned at his answer. He must be joking. He had to be. Was my father really killed over a stupid rivalry in a small hunk of plastic? He had never been a good man. I never expected him to change his ways. No, I wanted to be the one to ruin his life. To see him rot for what he had done to us. It felt like he had gotten the easy way out. I shook my head, needing to put that all behind me to address a different important point. Are you? I started, but found it impossible to say the next few words. Somehow, he understood what I wanted to say. A slight white light came from his pupils as his face sank deeper into darkness. This man was not human. That fact should have been hard to accept, yet I did so right away. He still had plans for us, and I dreaded what those could be. I was scared of him. It felt like the eyes of some ancient beast were staring in my direction. Suddenly, I found it impossible to speak. My body froze when he stood from the chair. With 3 steps, he shortened the distance between us, his hand out to take hold of the scared prey. I simply could not move. Everything happened in slow motion. In a hard movement, he grabbed my arm and tossed my small body aside. Sprays of blood came from his chest as a clawed hand exploded out of his flesh. He was tossed across the room, landing in a heap in the small closet. My heart was beating like a jackhammer when I saw the next threat. It wasn't even remotely human, and it didn't try to hide behind a mask like Graves. It rose from the floor, coming out inky black shadows that appeared. The body looked to be an ever-moving body of a centipede with human arms. Each hand had clawed fingers perfect for ripping apart flesh. The face had been stolen from a long-ago victim. The flesh was crudely stitched over a horrible insect shell. When it spoke, the mouth stayed shut, but the cheeks moved as if it needed a tongue to form words. Little one, come to me. Let my hands feel your flesh. Let my mouth taste your blood. Come join all the others in my stomach. It said, sounding far too serene for a creature with such a gruesome appearance. I took a few steps back, trying to think of what to do. This thing may reach Noah before I could. I might make it to the door in freedom if I gave up my sleeping little brother, but could I live with myself after? No, I could barely stomach the idea. I needed to buy time. What are you? I asked, voice shaking as much as my shoulders. A protector. Protect from death for little child flesh. Easy deal. Good deal. Tasty for me. Now come here. It waved so many hands, trying to get me to come closer. I shook my head, cursing my small body yet again. I needed to think of something, and fast. When I refused to go to the creature, it came to me. It sprang to life. All those hands so close to pulling me apart. I screamed for help, praying a higher power answered. The man who answered my plea was someone I thought had died in front of my eyes. Graves got between us and punched the creature so hard in its face that it crashed into the drywall on the other side of the room. His wound healed, leaving his clothing bloody and torn. Sorry, little missy. I'm old. It takes me a minute to get back up, he said with a small wink over his shoulder. I felt my face grow hot. My hair was short, and I wore boy clothing. I didn't have any feminine traits, however Graves saw something most didn't. The creature recovered, appearing more annoyed than injured. Nasty, nasty. No fair. No deals were made. I listened. You cannot harm me. The human has not permitted you. The creature hissed. My muscles tensed again as worry flooded my system. Did I have enough time to make a deal with him before this monster attacked? A smile appeared on my savior's face that shocked a bolt of fear down my spine. I only need permission to kill humans. You're a monster like myself, so it's all fair. He took a step toward the creature. It curled its large body inward the head, darting around, looking for a way to escape. It started to make promises, deals, anything to make Graves back off. The shadows that the monster lived inside turned on him. The room grew dark around us as countless glowing eyes appeared. Each pair of white specks belongs to the dead. Half-rotten animals emerged from the shadows, their mouths showing teeth ready to feast. They paid no attention to me as I rushed over to pick up Noah. He was limp in my arms, which worried me, but he was alive. I needed to feel his warmth while being surrounded by countless dead. They all fell on the monster at once. Dark blood came from it as each arm was ripped away. It cried for mercy that did not come. Graves watched his face twisted in a way that made him appear like a beast. His form started to warp as dark gray smoke poured out from his back, dark rotten faces flickering inside the mist. Slowly he was transforming into a creature more terrifying than the centipede the dead was ripping apart. You? What is this? How? The monster cried out, looking for answers. It paused, struggling, as if someone spoke the answer. Mad Dog? No, no. Free me. Do not take me. I have done nothing to you. The air in the room grew harsh. It was as if the room was closing in on itself. Over the screams and sounds of the dead creatures, I heard random shouting coming from downstairs. Faint gunshots came that soon got louder and louder. Something terrible was happening in this entire building. I found it hard to breathe. My lungs closed up as my body thought I was a moment away from death. The man in front of me was not the same person who brought two scared kids dinner. No, he had become something far too dark to understand. If hell was real, this may be what it was like. I wanted to leave, to go home no matter how terrible it was there. Graves, I said in a weak voice. I could barely see the man. He was before underneath the monster that was taking over. This beast was enjoying making the other monster suffer. He had the power to ensure not even death could give it a release. Dad. I broke my voice, almost lost in all the noise. The monster in front of me caught the word. He turned, the dark expression disappearing from his face. For just a moment, his appearance was different. He looked human. The tiredness from before disappeared, leaving a gentle expression behind. He said a word that I didn't understand. Something sounding long forgotten. Maybe a name. All at once he switched back to being Graves. He raised a hand, causing the dead creatures to drag away the monsters somewhere else. The sound of the fighting outside the room were still going on and getting louder. A large gray wolf appeared, the fur covered in dirt and blood. Half the face had rotten away, exposing the skull with two glowing white eyes. Oddly enough, I wasn't afraid of it, or when Graves walked over to lift me, Noah, on the back of the beast. What's going on outside? I asked, holding on to my little brother tightly. The leader of this building hired that monster to protect them, but the cost became too steep. It started to demand more children to consume, so they turned to me. He hired me to kill the leader of a rival gang. As you know, I did so, but only killed the leader. I also let slip that I was taking care of certain pests that had given them so many problems recently. He explained with a lazy smile on his face. Fourth story. Help me. There's a man pretending to be my dog. My name is Sydney. I am 13 years old. My best friend's name was Honey. She was a 9-year-old Goldie. The man pretending to be Honey looks like he is around 40 years old. He wears her skin, and my family believes it is her. They brought him home 3 weeks ago. My mom cried when she saw him sitting on the porch. My dad dropped to his knees, calling him our sweet girl as he scratched behind Honey's floppy ear, reaching his white, pink human ear. He didn't seem to notice how Honey's ear was slightly falling with each scratch. Danny, my little brother, hugged his neck and buried his face in the man's skin, rubbing the rolls of his back like it was fur. But it's not Honey. It's a naked man wearing my best friend's fur. Honey didn't walk like that. She didn't stumble over her own paws, or, well, hands and knees, because that's what they are. Hands and knees. He crawls awkwardly, shifting his weight like he's never done it before. Like he's learning how to be a dog. The worst part is, I think he believes it. He barks when my parents tell him to, his deep and manly voice sounding nothing like my Honey. He growls when Danny plays tug of war, getting in a dog-like playful position as drool drips from his chin and his body is on full display. He even wags what's left of her tail. It's unsettling. It makes me cry. He sits by the door when the leash comes out, panting with this strange, unnatural smile like he's excited, like he wants to be walked. I tried to tell my mom. I told her it wasn't Honey, but she just stroked his head and said, "Don't say that, Sydney. Look how happy she is to be home." The first night he got here, I heard scratching outside my window. I peeked through the curtains and saw him in the backyard, digging with his bare hands. His nails were caked with dirt, and he was muttering to himself between shallow, panting breaths. I stayed up all night listening to him claw at ground. The next morning, I found out why. When I went outside, there was a fresh hole near the fence where he'd been digging. It was sloppy, dirt scattered everywhere, and right at the bottom of it was Honey's old collar. It was torn, the leather shredded, and the metal buckle was stained dark red. I didn't hear him coming. "You shouldn't have gone out here," he said. His voice was low, and when I turned around, he was crouched by my legs, his head tilted like he was trying to understand me. His hands were dirty, trembling as he reached for me, but I bolted before he could get any closer. "Honey, come here, girl," my dad called out, and he went back to barking and tail wagging, trotting to him on hands and knees, but not before looking at me with his tongue out. Since then, he won't leave me alone. He follows me around the house, sniffing at my toes and licking my legs. Anytime I'd yell at him to stop, my family would tell me I've turned into a dog abuser. They'd make me pet him, and he would bark happily. He sits outside my door at night, whining softly, scratching at the wood. Last night, he finally pushed the door open. "Scoot over," he growled, climbing into my bed without waiting for me to answer. He curled up beside me, his knees pulled to his chest, and rested his head on my pillow. He smelled like dirt and sweat and something I don't want to name. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there, stiff and silent, as he muttered and whimpered in his sleep, his breath warm against the back of my neck. I could hear every human word that left his lips, and yet my family doesn't believe me. They really think it's Honey. I am the only one mourning my best friend. I don't think he's going to stop, and I'm scared. Fifth story fuck. My dog is scaring me. My ex didn't really like dogs, so after we broke up, the first thing I did was get a dog and all the other things he didn't approve of. Jake was a black lab mixed with a white patch on his chest, probably 50 or so pounds. I found him at our local adoption event. You donate whatever you can, and they choose a pet for you. And if you like the pet, you can accept the adoption match. The event was focused on animals that were on a kill list, and multiple shelters in the area were participating. So I went to the adoption event, and a woman named Angela introduced herself to me. She said she had been fostering Jake, and he was within the age range and size I was looking for. He's 2 years old. He'd been returned to the shelter because the family moved out of state and left him alone. She tells me that it was through no fault of his own because he was an amazing dog. Angela mentioned that he was a single pet kind of pet. She asked me if I wanted to take him on a walk, and she handed me his leash, and I hooked him up. I put his leash on him, and he just stared at me. I pulled the leash just slightly and asked him if he wanted to go for a walk, and he got up and walked to the door, kind of ignoring me, but being pretty obedient. Angela looked at me from the window while I walked him. I didn't really feel a connection to him. He was aloof and never looked at me unless I wasn't looking at him. I told her that I liked him, but would keep looking. I handed her back Jake, and she genuinely looked upset. I kept walking around the event and even volunteered to help put some of the dogs away into the vans to go home, hopefully to live another day. It was getting late and already dark when I made my way back to my car, and there was Angela with Jake. She was having a cigarette leaning against a car, talking to someone. It sounded like arguing. As I approached, she looked up at me. "Please take him. I can't keep him. He needs a good home." She pleaded with me, clearly desperate. I didn't know why, but I said yes, and before I knew it, she was handing me the leash and walking quickly away towards the street. The first few nights were fine. He slept under the bed, and I didn't really see him much. He seemed like he needed some time to readjust to being a pet. I didn't know how to connect with him. I'd throw him a toy, and he wouldn't come. I'd pour food out for him, and he wouldn't come out for it. But in the morning, it would be gone. I'm a pretty sound sleeper, but the sound of clawing under the bed a few days later woke me up out of a dead sleep. I jolted out of bed afraid. I was sweating, and my heart was racing. I remembered I have Jake, and I call for him. He doesn't come out. No surprise, I call for him again, and I hear him clawing the floor and pulling himself out slowly from under the bed. His eyes wide and human-like. I patted the bed beside me, and he looks at the bed for a second bit and sinks back down and crawls back under the bed, ignoring me further. I only saw him for a second, and the room was pretty dark, but he looked different, somehow larger and more menacing. I must have been seeing things, I thought. I had a hard time falling asleep. I wake up around 5 in the morning a few days later and go to my office across the hall and start to work. The way the desk is set up, if the door is opened all the way and the bedroom door is also open, you can see under the bed a little bit. As the sun starts to come up, I notice a dark object on the floor. I can't tell what it is. Maybe the blanket fell off the bed, but as the sun rises, the shape becomes a more familiar shape. It's Jake with his dark eyes fixed on me from under the bed. He grins at me, his teeth look sharp, and he's drooling. I closed and locked the office door, not knowing what to do or what the hell that is under the bed. He looks so normal most of the time. I call the shelter that hosted the event and tell them about Angela, who said she was from Shelter Out West. But the woman on the phone wasn't really listening, and she had never heard of anyone named Angela from any shelters out west. She asked me to leave my name and number, and she'd check the list again to make sure. I kicked myself for installing the doggy door. It was so odd to hear the flapping of the door randomly as Jake came and went only when I wasn't around. I'm going to let him out, call animal control, and tell them that I found this random dog. He's not chipped. I didn't sign anything. Angela kind of just gave him to me. I was racked with guilt, so upset about how much I wanted a dog. And now I'm thinking of doing this, but he wasn't just a dog. I unlock the door, and I can hear Jake in the bedroom. The door is somehow closed. I sit in my office all night, waiting for Jake to try to get in. He wouldn't go outside after that. It's like he knew of my plan and didn't want to give me an opportunity to call animal control. There were moments where he was a dog, and other times he was something else, this dog-like creature, moving in a way animals just don't. I snuck out of the house once I heard the door flap and drove as fast as I could to a hotel where I cried and screamed on the way. I was finally free, out from under the watchful eye of my goddamn shelter devil dog. I got a 15th floor room with a balcony and a view of the ocean. As soon as I got into the room, I checked under the bed, the closet, the bathroom, everywhere for Jake. For the first time in almost 2 months, I slept soundly. I woke up, and that feeling of dread and fear that had been bubbling like a bad dinner in my gut was gone. I stayed there for 3 days until my credit card bled. I went back home, and the first thing I noticed was my front door was wide open. I wasn't sure if I should go in, but I did, and the thickness in the air is gone. The house seemed brighter and felt better. I look around everywhere in the house, and when I was convinced he's truly gone, I sat on my couch and cried in relief. My first thought after that was that doggy door, and I ran to the garage, and I grabbed some with 2x4S, and I screw 5-inch screws in the door frame, and call a handyman and schedule someone to come over and replace the door. It had been almost 3 months since Jake left, and I've stopped seeing him sitting in the corner of the room at night, and I stopped hearing that clawing, dragging sounds under the bed when it's late, and I'm almost asleep. That is until last week I looked out my bedroom window because I heard an obnoxious, repetitive knocking sound outside that was driving me crazy. I figured it was a woodpecker. We had so many of them in the woods behind my house, and if they land nearby, I can hear them from any of the rooms on that side of the house. The sun had gone down, and it was almost dark outside. Out of the corner of my eye, I see something moving in the trees and a flash of red with black around it. I focus my eyes, and Jake grins at me, showing big white teeth. He looks straight at me, with the same no-expression about 15 feet up in the trees behind my house. I close the blinds, grab my gun from the safe, and put out on my nightstand. I keep hearing the knocking, and I lock the door and pull the covers around me. I don't know how I'm ever going to sleep again. I'm writing this from my mom's house. She only lives 20 or so minutes away from me, and I've been hearing sound at night here too. Rule number 4. If you're caught breaking the rules, the penalties may be severe. Okay, there's something wrong here. This is just talking in circles. I read back over the rules, and they look strange. More than just the strangeness of the rules/non-rules themselves, it was the way they were written. I went back and looked at each letter. Then I paid attention to the letters that were capitalized. It looked like some hidden message. They're watching. I hesitated. Who's watching? I decided to keep reading in hopes that this would begin to make some sense. Rule number 5. Do not, under any circumstances, make noise every time you do a round. Message received. Don't move. I stood there, immobile, wondering how long I was meant to play this game and if someone would come by and tag me to unfreeze me and allow me to start my round. As I waited, chuckling to myself at the ludicrousness of this insane game of freeze tag, I felt the air grow cold. Clouds chugged out of my mouth like an old steam train as I fought the urge to rub my arms. A chill that had little to do with the sudden temperature drop ran down my spine as I felt a presence in the room. It crept up behind me, silent as the grave. I could feel its hot breath wash over me as it sniffed. Instead of enjoying the sudden warmth, my temperature plummeted. My heart hammered in my chest. It was all I could do to keep from running away in sheer terror. As it passed by, I was overwhelmed by the stench of death. This thing was every nightmare I've ever had personified. I refused to open my eyes and see its hideous form for fear of passing out. Instead, I focused on imitating a statue, which was nearly impossible with my freezing body aching to shiver in frozen dread. The nameless terror passed to the far side of the room, taking some of the cold with it, and then, as suddenly as it came, it was gone. The room returned to normal temperature, but I waited a few moments before moving, just to be sure. Once I felt it was safe, I nearly collapsed to the floor in relief. After giving myself a moment to recover, I glanced at the paper with a newfound fear. Was this a harbinger of doom, or a warning label meant to keep me safe? Unsure if I wanted to read the rest, I took a moment to reevaluate my current career choice. Could I just walk out and say I quit? After a brief internal debate, I decided it wasn't worth the money if I was about to be dragged through a portal to hell. Just a short time ago, I would have considered that thought laughably ludicrous, but it was seeming more plausible by the moment. I started toward the exit door with every intention of calling and telling my boss I wouldn't be finishing the shift. Unfortunately, the door had other plans. When I pushed on the crash bar, nothing happened. I tried turning the deadbolt, but it refused to move. After a few minutes of futility, I gave up, frustrated and determined to just sit in this room until morning came around. Sitting at the desk, I spun around in the chair, waiting for the next 9 hours and 13 minutes to pass quickly. 5 minutes later, out of sheer boredom, I glanced at the paper. Rule number 6. You can't just sit at the desk and wait for the door to open upon the ending of your shift. Suck it up. Are you serious? I said in frustration. Someone thinks they're funny, huh? Glancing back at the paper, below Rule 6 was 3 letters. Yes. I backed away and got up to do my round, if nothing else to get away from this all-seeing sheet of paper that I had grown afraid to look at. Hesitating, I reached for the door to the room where the nightmare had disappeared. Glancing up, I saw a slip of paper taped to the door. It said, "The only way out is through." Sighing heavily, my trembling hand turned the knob and slowly opened the door. As I closed it, on the other side was another slip of paper. This one said, "Avoid eye contact and you'll be fine." Confused by the cryptic statement, I turned and realized what it meant. The room was full of stuffed creatures of many shapes and sizes. Most of them seemed to be mythical in nature of the cryptid variety. There was a Bigfoot, Skinwalker, Dogman, Jersey Devil, Wendigo, and many others. As my eyes scanned the room, I noticed movement. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The Skinwalker turned its head just slightly to look right at me. I quickly darted my eyes away in fear and disbelief when the Dogman turned its head to stare at me. As panic coursed through my veins, I turned to go back through the door, remembering what the piece of paper on both sides of the door said. The only way out is through, and avoid eye contact, and you'll be fine. I felt the last statement was akin to saying, if you hold on tight enough on a roller coaster, you won't need the safety harness. Aiming my eyes at the floor, I turned and started toward the far side of the room. I hoped that all they would do was watch. That hope was dashed. I heard growls and footsteps from all around the room. Hesitating, I wondered if I would need a clean pair of pants by the time I reached the far side. That is, if I survived. The sounds of footsteps grew louder behind me when suddenly there was a pair of hairy legs blocking my path. I stopped as a low growl made the air vibrate. "Oh, dear God," I whispered, knowing that my life was about to end horribly and painfully. Fighting the urge to look up, I sidestepped and went around the legs, hoping to pass unnoticed. I counted my footsteps, hoping each one wouldn't be my last. Silently praying, I continued toward the door with my eyes aimed down, watching nothing more than my feet. It seemed like the longest walk of my life, listening to the mythical creatures behind me come to life and sounding every bit like they were following me, just waiting for the right moment to grab me and turn me into a late-night snack. It came as a surprise when I bumped my head into the far wall. I did this the whole way across the room, still listening for sounds, but becoming more confident with each step that I wouldn't hear any. The door was just a few feet to the side of where I'd aimed. Somehow, I'd gone in a straight line. Grabbing the doorknob, I slowly turned it so as not to alert the snake if by some trick I ended up back in that room. But there was no trick and no snake. The door opened to blinding light. I covered my eyes to give them time to adjust. Once they had acclimated, I looked around at a beautiful room full of clouds. There were even clouds on the floor. It was disconcerting at first and almost made me lose my balance because they were so well painted that it literally looked like I was walking on clouds. I took a tentative step into the room, making sure that it was an illusion and I wasn't about to fall thousands of feet to my death. Holding my breath, I stepped onto the first cloud and let go of the door frame. It was firm like a floor should be. My second and third steps were more confident as I realized how effective the illusion was. Once I acclimated, walking on clouds was fun. This was turning out to be the easiest room I'd been in so far. That's when I heard the scream. It was deafening and seemed to come from everywhere at once. I dove to the floor, only to realize there was nowhere to hide from whatever it was. I stood out like a sore thumb against the blue sky and white fluffy clouds painted on every surface of the room. The screams sounded again, and I began to run, having no idea which way I was going or where the screaming was coming from. For all I knew, I was running toward whatever it was. I just knew it didn't sound human, and I had no desire to find out what it was. Soon the choice was taken out of my hands. I saw a dark spot appear against the clouds that quickly became larger. It was almost on me when I dove to the floor, feeling something sharp rake my back. Pain shot through me as I reached around and found the back of my shirt in shreds. Not only that, but my hand was covered in blood. Whatever it was had sliced my back open, and I was bleeding. Adrenaline kicked in, and I ran faster than I ever have. The problem was, I didn't know where I was running to or what I was running from. I was just running. I heard wings flapping, and I looked back just in time to see the largest bird of prey I've ever seen. It looked like a golden eagle, only the thing was massive. The wingspan was easily 20 feet. As I was running, I turned to get a closer look at this thing at the same time I was trying to get away from it. My feet got tangled up, and I fell backward just as the razor-sharp talons passed over mere inches away from my face. I jumped up and started running again. As I glanced back to find my attacker, I was met with the strangest sight. There was a smear of blood on the floor where I had just been lying. It looked like someone had wiped blood on a cloud. The wings flapped again. I knew it was close. I had run out of luck. It would be ready for anything this time. Its razor-sharp talons would rip me to pieces. There was no doubt about it. There was only one option. I jumped and whipped around in midair, throwing my flashlight as hard as I could. It connected with its head that was mere feet away. It screamed and dove off to the side, impacting with the floor so hard I felt the vibration and landing in a heap. I didn't stop to check on it. The door loomed ahead of me, and I pushed myself for every ounce of speed my body could muster. Turning the knob and opening the door in one smooth motion, I dove through and slammed it shut. Laying on the floor, breathing hard, trying to catch my breath, I knew I was a sitting duck for whatever monster lurked in this room. I rolled over to get in some defensive position for whatever was about to attack when I saw I was back in the main hall. I had somehow survived my first, and, as far as I was concerned, last round. I stumbled my way to the restroom, in the back of my mind wondering what kind of insanity I would find in there. Would I have to crawl through the mirror into another dimension to get a roll of toilet paper? Fortunately, the restroom held no surprises. I took off my destroyed shirt and ran water over it to clean up my back as best I could. When I was done, I put some paper towels on the wound and put my jacket on top of it. The desk and chair were where I spent the rest of the night. Surprisingly, it had taken me almost an hour to complete the round. As I sat there, pondering if I could survive another night at this job, I saw a dark spot form on the wall and detach itself only to float over toward me. I closed my eyes and sat perfectly still, ignoring the sudden drop in temperature. The stench of death surrounded me, but I refused to move. For a moment I thought I heard a sound like sniffing, and then it seemed to diminish. Once the temperature rose again, I opened my eyes, and the apparition was gone. As bored as I was for the next few hours, I wasn't tempted to do another round, not even in the slightest. When 9 o'clock rolled around, the boss/curator appeared and glided over to me wearing a little grin. "I see you managed to make it through," he said. "Congratulations, you're the first one in some time." "The first one to make it through a single round?" He nodded. "How many others have there been?" I said with a haunted look in my eyes. He shook his head. "Let's not worry about that, shall we?" he said. "Here is the amount we agreed upon." He handed me a stack of bills, and I gladly took them. "Would you be interested in staying on and being my permanent nighttime guard?" I looked at the money and sighed. As much as I'd like to, I don't see how this job could be called permanent when the mortal danger is so real. It is a challenge, I'll admit. However, you rose to it last night, he said. I'm prepared to offer you twice the amount I gave you if you agreed to stay on. I stared at the fistful of money and imagined not having to struggle with bills or any other expenses. Then I turned a little, and my back painfully reminded me of the dangers. I'd have to think about it, I said. While you're thinking, consider this. You have yet to see the basement. Basement? He nodded. It's considerably more challenging. I'll let you know. Very well. You can see yourself out. I recommend getting that back tended to. With that, he vanished into thin air right in front of my eyes. I looked at the money, wondering if it would vanish as well. Fortunately, It remained firmly in my grasp as I walked toward the front door. For some reason, I felt hesitant to open it and leave. It was as if some force was exerting itself against me, like the museum didn't want me to go. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, more like a dog losing its favorite toy. I pushed the doors open and left. This whole ordeal made me ponder my concepts of reality, as well as being terrified of the day when the things in the building would escape somehow. The big question was, did I need the money that badly? Was I willing to put myself in mortal peril just for a few measly dollars? I turned and looked back at the museum. In the daylight, it looked innocent. None of the terrors that lay within showed on the outside. As I turned to head home, I swore I saw a fleeting glimpse of the apparition. It seemed to be following me. I looked again, and it was gone. Must have been my imagination. Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comment section.